Today's material explores the concept of AI washing, urging the audience to become harder to fool by asking critical questions about AI-powered products. Let's just dive right into the high-level feedback.
Yeah, absolutely. So, getting right into it, the practical application of your investigative questions requires more concrete grounding to ensure the reader can effectively utilize them in the real world.
Right. Looking closely at that specific section where the writer lays out these questions, they introduce what they call these quiet little questions.
Yes, exactly.
Telling the reader to ask things like, what breaks if you remove the AI? Or where's the human? Or show me a number, which is great. They're basically trying to hand their audience this superpower against deceptive marketing.
And the conceptual framework there is undeniably strong. I mean, the ideas are brilliant. But the core weakness is that these questions remain entirely abstract within the text.
How so? Like just too theoretical?
Exactly. You're handing the reader a set of complex diagnostic tools, but you aren't actually demonstrating how to use them on a real patient, you know?
Ah, yeah, that makes sense.
Because you haven't given your audience the context on how to find these answers, or even what those answers typically look like out in the wild, the superpower you're offering just feels theoretical. We are telling them to be investigators, but we aren't showing them the scene of the crime.
That's a great way to put it. It is a bit like giving someone a beautifully calibrated compass, but just refusing to give them a map.
Right, exactly.
The tool itself is fully functional, but without the surrounding topography of a real-world scenario, the user is still just essentially lost in the woods. So what's the fix here?
Well, the actionable suggestion for improvement is to ground these abstract questions by weaving in a brief, recognizable micro-case study. We really need to show the reader what the answer to one of these questions actually looks like in practice.
So they can model that behavior the next time they encounter a suspicious product on their own?
Precisely. If they see how it's done, they can replicate it.
I hear what you are saying about grounding the abstract, but let me challenge the execution of that just for a second.
Sure, go for it.
If we look at the way this paragraph is constructed, it has a very deliberate kind of staccato rhythm. Where's the human? Show me a number. It's really punchy.
It is. It has great momentum.
Right. So if you are suggesting we bog that down with a massive multi-paragraph case study about some specific software company's logistical failures, don't we risk completely ruining the momentum of the prose?
That is a very fair concern, and pacing is definitely critical here. But a case study does not have to be a sprawling narrative, you know? It can be a single surgical insertion.
Okay, so keep it tight.
Very tight. The goal is just to provide cognitive friction. When a reader encounters a list of purely abstract rhetorical questions, they often just glide right over them.
Yeah, the brain just nods along thinking, yes, I should totally ask that.
Exactly. But the information doesn't actually anchor in their working memory because there is no narrative hook. We need to provide a micro-scenario. For concrete examples, right after the question, where's the human, you could illustrate a highly common modern deception.
I see. Something like those fast food drive-thrus that claim to be fully automated by AI, but we're actually just routing the audio to call centers halfway across the globe.
Yes, that is a brilliant example. If you add a quick beat about an AI-powered customer service chatbot or a drive-thru where the human is actually an underpaid worker manually reading transcripts, you instantly validate the premise of the question.
Right. You aren't just telling them to ask, where's the human? You're actively showing them that the human is usually hidden behind a curtain pulling the levers.
Exactly. So rather than simply posing the question and moving on, you immediately provide the bleak answer that the question is inherently designed to uncover.
Let's apply that to the other prompt, the show me a number one. If we don't want to leave it hanging, how do we anchor that syntactically without breaking that punchy rhythm we talked about?
Well, for another concrete example, you could use a quick parenthetical or a single vivid clause attached right to the end of the sentence. You might write something like, show me a number, like the actual success rate hidden on page 40 of their terms of service.
Oh, wow. Yeah, page 40 of their terms of service works incredibly well because it is a highly specific, visceral location that everyone just intuitively understands.
Right, it's universal.
It signals the exact location where corporate deception usually lives. It takes the whole philosophical idea of skepticism and turns it into a physical action, like literally scrolling to page 40.
And that transitions the text from a theoretical lecture into a tactical field manual. If your stated goal in this piece is to make the audience harder to fool, you cannot just give them the theory of skepticism.
You have to give them the muscle memory of skepticism.
Exactly. Even 6 or 7 words of concrete grounding will transform these questions from something your reader merely reads into a weapon they actually wield in their daily lives.
Which is incredibly powerful. And, equipping the reader with these grounded practical tools sets a very specific, almost combative tone. You're training them to point their finger at the deceptive corporation.
Right, it's very outward-facing.
But then your text shifts gears. Because once the reader is armed with these tactical questions, you move abruptly into the psychological meaning behind the scam itself.
Which brings us to the next structural observation. The narrative shift from tactical consumer advice to philosophical commentary on human vulnerability happens too suddenly to carry its full intended emotional weight.
Yeah, looking at the draft, you make a compelling case for the shift by highlighting a very specific realization. You take us from asking, is the fine print whispering something the ad is screaming, directly into the statement, because in the end, AI washing isn't really a story about technology, it's a story about us.
Which is a beautiful line.
It really is. And from there, you explore how one shiny buzzword can just switch off the critical part of our brains. So what's the issue with that transition?
The weakness here lies entirely in the connective tissue. You essentially skip a crucial emotional and logical beat. We are moving at breakneck speed from the mechanics of reading a deceptive advertisement straight to the deep psychology of human credulity.
It does feel a bit sudden.
It feels jarring. It risks leaving the reader behind because you haven't adequately closed the loop on the tactical advice before you kick open the door to the philosophical critique.
So, a key theme running through this material seems to be human psychology. Is there a risk that focusing solely on the advertiser's trickery in the first half makes the pivot to our gullibility feel a bit unearned?
Absolutely. And that's exactly why the bridge is so necessary.
Because we are jumping from, the scammers are lying to you, straight to, you are deeply gullible. That feels like a massive leap.
It is.
If I think I am reading a piece that validates my intelligence by teaching me how to spot a scam, and suddenly the author tells me I am the reason the scam works, I might feel a bit attacked.
What you are describing there is defensive dissonance. If the first half of the piece trains the reader to point the finger outward, at the scammer, the ad, the fine print, the sudden instruction to point the finger inward at their own cognitive blind spots is going to trigger resistance.
No one likes being told they're the problem.
Exactly. The human brain does not like being told it is foolish without a very clear, logical runway explaining why. So the suggestion for improvement here is to insert a transitional thought. We need a deliberate bridge that seamlessly connects the failure of the product to the vulnerability of the consumer's mindset.
It is a bit like walking through a door expecting a corporate boardroom where we are going to dismantle a fraudulent business plan and suddenly finding yourself in a therapist's office where we are discussing my childhood need to believe in magic.
That is a perfect analogy. Both rooms have immense value to the thesis, but you cannot just teleport the reader through the drywall.
Right, the threshold between them needs to be properly and carefully constructed. So what does that threshold look like?
Well, a bridge holds the external scam in one hand and the internal vulnerability in the other, and it slowly brings them together. For a concrete example, right after you finish the list of tactical questions, you could introduce a bridging phrase like, when you realize the tech doesn't hold up, you realize the illusion relies entirely on you.
Oh, I like that. That framing places the burden of the illusion back onto the observer. But it does so gently, as a natural consequence of the investigation we just conducted.
Exactly. It doesn't point a finger. It just reveals a truth.
It perfectly sets up your line. It's a story about us.
Or for another concrete example, if you want to focus heavily on the questions you just asked, you could write something like, the absence of those answers reveals a deeper truth about why we fall for this in the first place.
That's really smooth, too.
Right, because that kind of sentence honors the tactical questions, specifically pointing out that the corporation won't give you the answers, while explicitly paving the way for the psychological exploration of our own gullibility.
In highly persuasive writing, a successful pivot requires a planted foot.
Yes, the planted foot.
And the planted foot here is the failure of the technology. Only once that foot is firmly established can you swing the other leg around to explore the psychology of the consumer. But right now, in the draft, both feet are moving at the exact same time.
That's spot on. You are currently relying on the sheer rhetorical force of the phrase, "It's a story about us," to do all the heavy lifting. But the reader needs a moment to digest the mechanics of why the failure of the AI points to a failure in ourselves.
Because if the machine isn't actually doing the work, our imagination is forced to do the work. I mean, the scammer isn't building a fake machine that does fake things. The scammer is just building an empty box.
And we are filling it.
Exactly. We are the ones filling it with magic because we so desperately want to believe we are living in the future.
And if you spell that out for the reader, the resulting philosophical commentary hits exponentially harder. You aren't just vaguely telling them they are gullible. You are showing them the exact mechanism of their gullibility. You are exposing the empty box.
By building that smoother bridge, the realization of our own complicity in the illusion lands with much greater impact. It grounds the philosophy.
It absolutely does.
And understanding our own vulnerability leads directly to the cost of that vulnerability, which brings us to the end of the piece. Your text builds toward a very specific closing image where the stakes of falling for this illusion are finally laid out.
Right, the ending. The closing visual metaphor is incredibly striking, yet its impact could be significantly amplified by linking it directly to the financial stakes established just prior.
Let's dissect how this piece wraps up. You introduce a high-stakes financial concept, stating that the most expensive 4 words in the world right now are, "Trust me, it's AI."
Which is a fantastic hook for the conclusion.
It is. You are invoking massive corporate spending, wasted budgets, and systemic fraud. But then you shift to a very different kind of imagery, celebrating the fact that the reader has now leveled up and can see the legs sticking out of the robot suit.
Yes, the Scooby-Doo villain unmasking.
Right. You conclude by urging the reader to go look, promising they'll find way more of those legs than they'd like. It's a great image.
It is highly evocative and memorable, but the fundamental weakness in this conclusion is that the two core ideas, the financial danger and the visual unmasking of the illusion, are completely siloed from one another.
They don't interact.
Which implies millions or billions of dollars in wasted capital. But then, you immediately pivot to a whimsical, almost low-stakes visual of legs sticking out of a robot suit. The failure to marry these two concepts dilutes the final punch of the piece.
Okay, I want to push back on that slightly because I think the contrast you are critiquing might actually be intentional on the writer's part.
How so?
Well, we have cold, hard finance on one side, and we have cheap, flimsy illusion on the other. Doesn't the asymmetry of those two ideas highlight the absurdity of AI washing?
I see where you're going with that.
It's almost like a cinematic cut, you know. We have the tense, high-stakes thriller shot of the draining bank account, and then an immediate smash cut to a guy in a cheap cardboard suit.
The contrast itself is highly valuable. I agree. But the issue is the sequence and the separation. The recency effect in cognitive psychology tells us that the last thing a reader consumes is what they remember most vividly.
Ah, so what they leave with is just the joke.
Exactly. If they finish your piece and the lingering image is just a silly Scooby-Doo villain robot suit, the tension you built up dissipates. They might walk away chuckling, but ultimately unconcerned.
That makes a lot of sense. The tension just sort of deflates.
Right. So the suggestion for improvement is to tie the financial danger directly into the final visual metaphor syntactically, so the reader feels the true cost of the illusion right up through the final period.
Okay, so we need to ensure that the humor of the robot suit doesn't undermine the gravity of the drained bank account. We want to fuse the high stakes with the memorable visual, keeping the tension locked in.
Exactly.
How do we mechanically weave those together in those final sentences?
For a concrete example, you can modify the ending to combine them so the imagery actively serves the warning. Instead of leaving the robot suit as a standalone joke, you could write, "You can see the legs sticking out of the robot suit now, and you can see exactly whose wallet they're reaching for."
Oh, wow. That instantly changes the temperature of the sentence.
It really does.
It takes the whimsical image of the fake robot and suddenly makes it predatory. The legs aren't just funny anymore. They belong to a grifter who is actively stealing from you.
It recontextualizes the humor into danger. Alternatively, if you want to lean into that disparity of value that you pointed out earlier, you could adjust the pacing and say, those 4 words cost millions, but now that you've leveled up, you can see the cheap human legs sticking out of the expensive robot suit.
Cheap human legs directly against the expensive robot suit. That is great. By just opposing those in the exact same breath, you highlight the asymmetry of the scam without losing the financial thread.
Yes, they sit right next to each other in the reader's mind.
You are reminding the reader that they are paying a premium for something that is fundamentally low rent.
And the ultimate goal of any closing metaphor is not just to provide a clever flourish before the curtain drops. It should be the final tightening of the screw.
I love that. The final tightening of the screw.
By intertwining the financial stakes with the visual unmasking, you leave your reader with an indelible, high-definition picture of exactly what they stand to lose if they stop paying attention. If they remember the cheap legs walking away with their money, they walk away vigilant.
It is about making sure the tension established in the beginning is fully resolved in the final beat, rather than accidentally deflated by a joke.
Exactly.
So, looking at the entire landscape of your submission, we've identified 3 key opportunities to elevate the work and maximize its impact. First, you need to ground your abstract investigative questions with real-world anchors, like the underpaid remote worker or the buried success rate on page 40, giving your reader actionable muscle memory.
Very important.
Second, build a smoother, more deliberate psychological bridge between your tactical consumer advice and your philosophical commentary on human gullibility to avoid triggering that defensive dissonance we talked about.
Right, don't teleport them through the drywall.
And finally, intertwine your closing visual metaphor of the robot suit directly with the tangible financial stakes to ensure your final warning resonates powerfully and keeps the tension high.
Your underlying observations in this text are already exceptionally sharp. I mean, you have a highly attuned eye for the absurdities of our current technological landscape and a true gift for crafting memorable phrases.
The ideas are absolutely all there.
Your writing will be absolutely maximized. It transforms a very smart observation into a deeply resonant, unforgettable argument.
If you are listening to this critique of your work, we highly encourage you to take these actionable suggestions, implement them into your draft, and submit the revised piece back in for another session. We genuinely love seeing how these concepts evolve and sharpen. Because in the end, navigating this landscape isn't just about having the right questions, it's about knowing exactly where the compass points, so you never end up paying a premium for an empty suit.